Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Jessica Bronzert, and want to welcome you to my presentation at the Women's Global Leadership Conference in Energy called Change the Game. Everything you thought you knew about leadership is wrong. So my name is Jessica Bronzert. I own the Sparks Group. We are an executive coaching, leadership development, and change management firm, and we specialize in an area called vertical development, which is what I'm going to talk to you about today. So the first question that I want to pose to you is, how would you define maturity? How do you know when somebody is mature or not? And I bet you're thinking to yourself, I can tell when somebody is more mature and less mature. And I maybe can even think about my own maturity growing and changing over time. And that's essentially what we're going to talk about today, and how that relates to leadership development, how that relates to business results. But first, I want to talk to you about why this is even important. Why is this idea of leadership maturity so critical? And that's because increasingly we are living in a VUCA world. So many of you have probably heard this term before. If you're not familiar with it, it comes out of the military to describe sort of the new conditions of warfare. But we found that it applies equally as well to the business world and to organizational life. And that is the idea that the level of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity that we're experiencing is only increasing over time, and that is putting additional demands or different demands on us in terms of what we need to do for leadership. In particular, the parts that are interesting to me, or the way that I think about this, is the level of complexity in particular in organizations is really increasing. And that's the idea that we can really tell the connection between, or discern the connection between, cause and effect. And that increasingly there are so many factors contributing to what's going on that connection between cause and effect is harder to discern. We may not even be able to see it ahead of time. We may not even be able to see it in hindsight, and that all of those things are making organizational life so much more difficult to lead through. And that is evidenced by this research that I'm showing you on this next slide called the complexity crisis. This comes from a firm named Lectica. And what they have shown in the for-profit world, the nonprofit world, and in the government space is that the level of task demand, we'll call it, that is being required of us in increasingly higher leadership levels is outpacing what we're able to bring to that. So what you can see here is that we have supervisors all the way up to senior leaders, and then the level of complexity that they're being required to meet in the red line heading up. And what you notice is that the gap between the leadership level and the task demand, or the level of complexity, is increasing as the level of leadership goes up. So essentially what that's saying is that the gap between what is needed to be successful and what leaders are able to bring to that is growing the more senior we get in organizations. And that essentially is what is causing the leadership development imperative, right? So why our current leadership efforts are needed to meet that level of complexity that we're finding increasingly in our organizations. And yet our traditional approach to leadership development is insufficient, because our traditional approach to leadership development is skill and competency based. It is not based on vertical development, which I'm going to explain to you in a minute. So a couple of quotes I have hiding down here in the slides. Competency alone does not make for effective leadership, yet the current focus for developing leadership effectiveness is primarily on improving competency, which is necessary but insufficient. That comes from Mastering Leadership by Bob Anderson and Bill Adams. And then Nick Petrie from the Center for Creative Leadership says, most leaders already know what they should be doing. What they lack is the personal development to do that. And so the case that I'm building for you is that the world is increasingly VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. What we're seeing is that the gap between what leaders need to bring to deal with that complexity and their ability to meet it is growing, especially the more senior they get in organizations. And that our current approach to leadership development is insufficient because it's focused on skills and competency and not on vertical development. So at this point, you're probably wondering, well, what is vertical development? Just tell me what it is. And so I will do that. Vertical development, or the antidote to this leadership development VUCA environment that I'm describing to you, is the idea that we are able to see and navigate complexity, that we are able to take multiple perspectives, that we are able to self-reflect on our own behavior and adjust increasingly in real time, and that we can hold opposing ideas or opposing viewpoints simultaneously, right? Hold contradicting ideas. And so it's akin to climbing up a ladder, climbing up a staircase or a mountain, and being able to see more angles, see more views, have more perspective. And so that's the analogy here that's shown by the staircase. Another way to think about what vertical development is to contrast it to horizontal development. And so horizontal development is the traditional approach to leadership development, that idea that skills and competencies are the way to go, versus vertical development, which is about increasing your ability to deal with complexity and take those perspectives and reflect on your own behavior. And so the analogy here is that I could continue to pour coffee or tea or water into that smallest cup on the screen here, and that would be akin to horizontal development, right? I'm just going to add more to my existing container. Okay, add more skills, add more competencies to my existing container. Vertical development, on the other hand, is actually about making the container bigger so it can do more and do more well. And so that's really the difference between horizontal and vertical development. And historically, we have not paid attention to vertical development in an intentional way. There are certain experiences that kind of get us there naturally, but traditional efforts have been really dedicated towards horizontal development. And so how does vertical development work? A nice analogy for it is the rings of a tree, right? So if we are looking at a tree stump and we can see all of these rings, we humans are very similar in the sense that we add rings over time. We grow vertically over time up to a certain point. It's much more optional than it is for children, for example, but we do grow over time. We can't skip any of the stages in the model. And so just like a tree has to add each ring in succession to get to the outer rings, to get to be a big tree, we are the same way. We can't just skip to a later stage of vertical development. We have to go through each of the stages in order, and they're linear. The other thing about vertical development that is signified by the tree trunk is that we still have everything that came before. So just like the tree has all of the rings in the center of it that it started with as a baby tree or as a sapling, we still have access to all of the stages that came before us, even if we are at a later stage of development. And so that means that it's a blessing and a curse. We can both reach back to where we are. We can also sort of be triggered to fall back to those earlier stages of our development. So I'm going to show you the actual model of vertical development now. And this is a lot, there's a lot on this page. I'm not expecting you to take all of this in right now. We're going to talk through each one of these stages. But the idea here is that each of these stages of development, starting from opportunist and going all the way to alchemist, describe the journey of human meaning making and what we experience as we grow over time. So we start out at these earlier stages, and some of us, not all of us, grow to these later stages. So you're getting a little bit of a look there. Let's talk through each one of these. So the opportunist stage is really the very first adult stage of development that we will find a lot of young adults in. There are not very many grown adults who are still in this stage. I think it's far fewer than 10% actually are still in this stage, a very small number of people. Opportunists are really about getting their own needs met and winning at all costs. And it's very focused on self, it's very focused on winning. And so I view myself as either you're with me or you're against me. This is obviously a stage that is not well correlated to leadership development or to getting good business results. However, people who have a center of gravity, as it were, at the opportunist stage can be really good at sales. They can be really good in crisis. Think about Rudy Giuliani after 9/11. He did a great job of sort of leading the country forward, standing on top of the pile of rubble and saying that we were going to get the people who did this to us. That's very opportunistic behavior, able to lead the charge, take control, but it can often be very, very self-serving at the same time. So again, not a lot of people at that stage, but it is sort of the beginning point as we're coming out of young adulthood into more mature adulthood. It's one of the very first stops we make. The next stage, where we do have about 10% of the adult population, is called conformer or diplomat or group-centric are other words for this stage. And in this stage, really what I'm solving for from opportunists, which was all about myself and getting my needs met, now I really want to be part of something that's bigger than myself. And so I affiliate with a group or an identity of some sort, and I really submit to all the norms of the group and all of the beliefs of the group. And so I don't really have my own ideas. I don't really have my own beliefs. This could be a church, this could be a religion, it could be a church group, it could be a family identity, it could be a racial or ethnic identity. Think about sports teams in the United States. We really kind of scratch the itch of wanting to belong to something when we are the fans of a particular football team or a particular soccer team, college football. This really speaks to the part of us that wants to be part of a group with an identity where we kind of know what the norms of that group are. So if you were to ask me if my center of gravity was a conformer, what do I think about something? I'm going to pair it back to you what the group believes. I'm going to tell you what the group leader thinks. I'm not really going to have my own opinions or my own thinking too much. And I really want to keep those relationships in the group quite smooth. So I'm not very oriented towards change here. I'm not very oriented towards progress. I really want to keep things the same to keep the group identity pretty static. So as you might expect, this stage is also not very well correlated to leadership effectiveness or business results. Because why? Because if I'm all about the relationship and wanting things to stay the same, I'm not going to get very good results on the business side of things. So after all of that conforming, I sort of want to stand out again. And the next stage that I move to is called expert. Expert or skill-centric is another way of thinking about this. And this stage is really where my subject matter expertise, my ability to solve problems, my ability to identify another expert in my space and rely on what they have to say really comes to the forefront. And so while in the last stage, I wanted to fit in and blend in and be a part of the group, in this stage, I really want to stand out and be recognized for my contributions and for my expertise. Again, this is very challenging from a leadership perspective, although we are gaining some benefits sort of at the individual contributor level in organizations. Why? Because we need people who can solve problems. We need people who are deep subject matter experts in their space. However, the downsides or the limitations of this stage are that I might feel like I'm the smartest person in the room and you don't really have a lot to offer because you're not the expert. I am. And so this stage is not very well correlated with teamwork. Stage is not very well correlated with leadership or business results. And so while we really value this stage, and by the way, almost 40% of the adult population has a center of gravity in the expert stage. This is a lot of us walking around have a big part of us that is active in the expert mindset. What's interesting is that you will find experts everywhere, and almost all of us can touch into that part of ourselves that really knows, feels like we're the smartest person in the room and knows what the answer is. But it's not an awesome leadership stage. It's not awesome. It's super important for organizational success, but not in leadership roles per se. So that's expert. So what causes me to move on to the next stage, which is called achiever or self-determining, is the idea that while I might be the smartest person in the room and I might really know my stuff, I finally begin to realize that I'm not actually getting the results I want because I'm not a good collaborator, because I'm not good at teamwork. And so that's what really pulls me forward into the achiever stage. This is the stage that is probably most commonly associated with traditional Western business stereotypes. This is the person who runs really hard, works really hard, has a to-do list a mile long, but is very outcome oriented, is very achievement oriented. Again, this is about 30% of the adult population. So between expert and achiever, we have 75, 80% of the adult population living in these two stages. This is a highly valuable stage from an organizational perspective. Why? For the same reason that expert is important. We need to be able to get things done. The difference here is that achievers begin to be able to work with other people and to get things done through teamwork. And so teamwork begins to come online here. Entry-level managerial capability begins to come online here. And so this is where we begin to see a little bit of leadership, a little bit of that orientation starting to come online. Very important stage and highly, highly valued in organizations. So the next stop in our developmental journey is highly related to the limitations of the achiever stage. So if you were to imagine the downsides or the limitation of running really hard and working really hard and just being fast and outcome oriented almost all of the time, what would the limitation be? It would be burnout, right? It would be the idea that we just get really tired and really frustrated. And indeed, if people are going to continue developing at this point, which only about 20% of the adult population does develop past the achiever stage, it's often because there is a level of frustration or burnout or a realization that the to-do list is never going to be done. And it's just, unless I change something, it's always going to be this way where I'm going so fast. My hunch is that many, many of you, if you're watching this recording, can really relate to this idea of, is it ever going to stop? And so what happens next is a move to what's called redefining or catalyst or individualist. And we have matches here to signify this stage, because this can be the stage of sort of burning everything down, if you will. So all of the constructs, all of the beliefs, all of the foundations of our lives that we've built on up to this point, we begin to question, we begin to unpack, we may begin to dismantle and undo some of them and recraft our lives in a way that is more consistent with our own values, as opposed to the values that are given to us by our families, by institutions, by society, by the media. So that is really hard work between achiever and redefining to say, what are my values? What are the values of the organizations, institutions that I'm a part of? And how much do those meet up or not? And if they don't meet up well enough, what do I need to do to realign my life to be more in line with my own values? And so people who are redefining in organizations really value all perspectives. They consider all perspectives to be equal to one another. They very much like to challenge the status quo. They don't just accept the goal for what it is, but they'll say, well, why is that goal? What are the beliefs and the constraints that are making that our primary objective? And should that really be our goal, or should we reconsider what this should be? And so this can be, while it is, we're every stage that we move towards, we're more and more correlated with leadership effectiveness and business results. This stage can be kind of frustrating to everybody who's at expert achiever in those earlier stages, because those folks are accepting the framework, are accepting the way things are, and are wanting to work within the current system. Folks at redefining are beginning to look at the system and go, maybe we should change the system, right? Maybe we need to back up a step. This can be a very lonely place, this stage. This can be a very difficult place to kind of do that hard work. And so it feels often like the ground is shifting underneath people, or that they're losing their footing. Things begin to come back together again at the next stage, which is strategist. So I said about 20% of folks will cross over from achiever to redefining. Only about 5% of the adult population will move from redefining to strategist. This is the stage that is currently best correlated to leadership effectiveness and business results. This is kind of where it all comes together. Folks who are able to operate at the strategist level can see the big picture, sort of indicated here by the visual. The ground feels a little bit more solid. They've done a lot of the work at the at the redefining stage to realign their lives and their work in a way that feels more meaningful to them. And now they actually, some of that achiever energy begins to come back online where they want to get things done, but it's done in a more strategic, more purposeful, more transformational kind of a way. And then the last stage here that we have, and there may be more stages after this, we don't know what the extent of human development can be, but this last stage that I'll describe for you is alchemist. And this is a stage where if the strategist can achieve transformational change, alchemists are capable of societal transformation. And their ability to look forward in time really extends to decades or to generations, where strategists can see, I don't know, maybe 10, maybe 25 years into the future. Alchemists really have quite a long-term vision. So think about Martin Luther King as one example of somebody who might have been an alchemist. So I hope that this really quick overview of these stages gives you a little bit of the story of what human development looks like and how that really correlates or has meaning inside organizations and what that means for leadership. And I hope that this feels to you, because it is such a different way of looking at developing leaders than the traditional method of skills and competencies. So if we think about, okay, great, this makes a lot of sense to me. I can see myself in this journey. I can see people in my organization on this journey. How would I help to grow myself vertically? What do I need to do? There's really 4 things that I will offer you. One of them is that complexity. So we humans have a tendency to make things simpler than they really are, to want to dumb things down, to have them be point A to point B, or have cause and effect be really obvious. And increasingly, that's just not the case. And so if you can begin to tune in to the complexity that is all around us in your life, in your organization, in your industry, in your marketplace, in your world, and start to imagine the downstream consequences of any particular decision that you might make or that somebody else makes and you're a party to, that is going to help you, right? So beginning to think about complexity, beginning to see it, beginning to take it into consideration, this is a really great way to help yourself grow vertically and to manage increasingly complex environments. We often think about this as getting on the balcony, right? We had that staircase, that spiral staircase earlier. If you can imagine yourself climbing on the balcony or climbing up to the top of a staircase and looking down on a situation, you can see so much more. What does it look like to look at things that way? Okay. Next, we want to take multiple perspectives. So this is really about climbing into the ways that our important stakeholders look at things and to appreciate that they are going to have a different view of things than we will. Okay. And so if you can stop and consider those other perspectives and incorporate them meaningfully into your decision making, into your thinking, you are going to be making better decisions, and you're going to be having a much more holistic view of things than you would otherwise. Third thing you can do is to take time to reflect and adjust. And so reflect on what? Reflect on your own thinking, reflect on your own behavior, and ask yourself, is there something that I could do differently? Something that I could have done or could do in the future differently? Is there another way to look at this situation that would be more helpful to me than the way that I have been looking at it? So we are the biggest lever that we have for how to make change in the world. And so the more we can observe ourselves objectively, put some space in between what we do and think, and actually reflect on our doing and reflect on our thinking, we're going to be more effective. And then the last thing that I mentioned here is we need to be able to hold opposing ideas simultaneously. So It's very rare that things are black and white anymore. The shades of gray that exist in the world, back to that complexity, are enormous. And so what that means is that very often ideas that seem opposing or seem contradictory can both be true at the same time, or they can both have merit at the same time. And so our ability to hold on to conflicting ideas simultaneously and identify potentially new ideas that incorporate both of those conflicting ideas, or at least to be able to take the best of both ideas while not rejecting them, is increasingly important. And so those are really the four things that you can do to help yourself and help others grow vertically. There are lots of ways to incorporate this into your own work life, into your non-work life, and into the leadership development programs that may be taking place at work. So that's a very quick overview of changing the game, a new way to think about leadership development. I want to thank you again. My name is Jessica Bronzert. My contact information is below. I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn, drop me a note. This is a really lovely topic that I care a lot about. Also have a white paper available if you would like to reach out to me, and I'm happy to send you a copy of the white paper. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and I hope you enjoy the conference.